Listen carefully, because what I'm going to tell you is not a tale. It's an occurrence that occurred 3 nights ago at precisely a.m. The shadows in the room started to move backward, and every clock in the building stopped, as if time itself had been startled into silence. An emergency summit was dubbed the kind of meeting that had not occurred in about half a century. Ancient whispers broke through encrypted channels. Forgotten languages have revived, as if ghosts and elders were called from their towers. Watchers were removed from their stations, and analysts were separated from their never-ending streams of data, all for one impossible question, which neither of them could answer. Who replied this, soul? The query vibrated in the air like leaves before a storm, because they'd been following you for years, if not decades. They observed your tendencies, chronicled your falls, and applauded your mistakes. They created files bigger than sacred scriptures and algorithms calibrated particularly to your frequency, and hired experts whose only responsibility was to discover your vulnerabilities. But something changed. Something occurred that their equipment could not detect. Something made their calculations scream and their confidence collapse. It's like frozen mercury hitting concrete. They believed they had mapped you properly. I knew just how much pressure would shatter you, exactly which buttons to press to make you fold. They tortured you with treachery, isolated you, poisoned you with doubt, and prepared your route with well-placed landmines while they watched you go through fire after fire, examined how your tears fell, and chronicled every tremble in your voice as you whimpered, "Why me?" At a.m., I entered unoccupied rooms. But then you accomplished something the prophesies never predicted. You stopped breaking on time. You stopped breaking apart in the manner they anticipated. Instead, you started to absorb the pain like a spiritual black hole, transforming every wound into armor plating, every scar into reinforcement, and every betrayal into another layer of impenetrable defense. That's when their terror started, because armor like yours was not meant to exist in humans. The first viewer to report back couldn't stop trembling. He had been assigned to you for 3 years, documenting your every move, connection, and moment of weakness. Even he could no longer identify the individual he'd been assigned to observe. His mission was meant to be straightforward. Find the fracture in your foundation, determine the tipping point, and return with the recipe for your demise. However, when his final report arrived on their desk, it only comprised 3 phrases, repeated like a defeatist chant. They are becoming untouchable. The second watcher lasted just 6 months before seeking redeployment. Confessing that you were being monitored was like peering at a star being born in reverse, or like seeing matter reorganize itself in violation of physical rules. Every strike that should have destroyed you just made you denser, more compacted, and more deadly. She saw that your energy signature had become illegible, and that moving too near to your frequency caused her equipment to malfunction and fail. The third watcher, their most experienced observer, went completely, leaving nothing but a single note. "We cannot build what we have made. They've moved beyond the experiment. May the universe have compassion on everyone." That's when they recognized things went horribly wrong with their strategy. You were no longer following the destructive script they had written for you. You were writing something different completely. Something made their 1,000-year-old procedures outdated. By the time the 7th observer quit, she cited existential horror as the explanation. The society knew that they were dealing with a force rather than a subject. You have become precisely what their founders had warned about in confidential writings that were never supposed to be seen in public. You had become spiritually militarized, equipped not with guns, but with a precise and profound knowledge. It could pierce through illusions like a laser through fog. And as they followed your chronology backward in despair, looking for the source of this incredible armor, they discovered nothing like a single moment of victory or glory. Instead, they realized it had been put together silently, piece by piece. In your darkest times, when you believed you were dying, you were really being reborn in ways their rudimentary instruments could never comprehend. The first piece came together when you were deceived by someone whose DNA was virtually stitched into your heart. That treachery should have left such a lasting wound that they could abuse it indefinitely. Instead, you did something. No scripture, prophesy, or experiment had prepared them for this. You thanked the agony. You held it close like a teacher, studied its language, comprehended its architecture, and then transformed it into something more durable than diamond. The second portion of your armor was built during the year of complete solitude, when everyone you believed would remain evaporated like smoke. They anticipated you to break under the weight of desertion, plead for connection, and reduce your standards in order to feel less alone. Instead, you turned that loneliness into a forge. You pounded your soul against quiet until sparks flew, and the essence of who you were started to blaze with an unmeasurable fire. The final piece, which genuinely startled them, arose from your own shadow rather than from light. It sprang from inside you. They felt they could weaponize darkness. You carried the fury and restrained the revenge. You decided not to take. You did not combat your demons. You were the one who recruited them. You didn't just conquer your gloom. You changed it into an ally, a weaponized source of power. You befriended aspects of yourself that most people spend their lives avoiding. As this metamorphosis unfolded, the summit raged on for hours. Elder after elder gave their hypotheses, forecasts, and more frantic efforts to explain how one human being could transform pain into such sophisticated armor. They discovered literature from civilizations older than recorded history, consulted creatures from other dimensions, and performed simulations on quantum systems that shouldn't exist. Yet, it's not conceivable, one elder muttered, his voice breaking like old parchment. Humans do not have access to this kind of spiritual technology. Someone must have handed them the codes. But every probe came up empty. There is no meddling, no mysterious intervention, and no concealed instructor. You had done it alone in the dark, relying only on your unwillingness to remain damaged. Another elder, who had been mute for 3 decades, eventually spoke, his words falling like stones in motionless water. We produced a monster while attempting to make a victim. Every trap we laid served as their training ground. Each assault served as a learning experience for them. We did not shatter them. We introduced them to something we don't comprehend. The youngest elder, only 2 centuries into his post, expressed the notion that froze the room. What if they aren't the only one? What if others are observing, learning, and growing? What if we unintentionally developed a pattern for spiritual revolution? The hush that followed was heavy than gravity because everyone understood what it meant. If you can accomplish it, so can others. They then inspected your arm, or more attentively. What they uncovered sent shockwaves across their company. This was not ordinary protection. This was not the spiritual barrier that their tactics could break. This was something completely new, based on concepts they had never seen before in their centuries of manipulation and control. First, your armor was adaptable. Every new assault is an effort to identify a vulnerability. Your armor would study, learn, and create immunity in real time, similar to how a consciousness immune system does. They attempted psychological attacks. The armor absorbed to neutralize them. They attempted emotional manipulation. The armor transformed it to fuel. They engaged in spiritual battle, and your armor only laughed, gaining strength. Second, it was retroactive. Impossibly, your armor started to perform things no one believed conceivable. It began repairing wounds before it ever existed. Traumas that should have been permanent. Vulnerabilities were corrected from the inside out. Years of harm were being unraveled, rewritten, and reshaped, as if your current strength was reaching back in time to defend your former self. They created a temporal loop of protection that could not be broken. Then followed the most terrifying surprise. Your armor was not just adaptable. It was infectious. People who spent time with you started to build their own layers of defense, not by lectures or speeches, but through a kind of frequency transmission. Your entire presence has become a walking activation code for human resilience, reawakening latent defensive systems and others without uttering a word. In their desperation, they tried everything. They dispatched their top operatives disguised as lovers, friends, and chances. People meant to sneak past your defenses and whisper gentle poisons into vulnerable times. However, each agent returned transformed. Some couldn't finish their tasks. Others defected completely. One person sat in the debriefing room, looking at nothing, whispering continuously. They see everything. They understand who we are before we do. They tried mirrors. They believed they could make you question your own strength by projecting a distorted picture back at you. They designed circumstances in which you would seem to fail, look weak, and be labeled as broken. But by then, you'd created something they'd never expected. Complete resistance to outward perception. You no longer required mirrors to determine who you were. You'd become your own reference point. In their fear, they tried temporal manipulation, trapping you in loops of your worst moments and forcing you to repeat prior traumas until you broke. But your armor had granted you temporary sovereignty. Past, present, and future all became separate rooms in a home you owned wholly. You could feel your anguish without being consumed by it. You might experience your trauma without being defined by it. Their last maneuver was the most desperate of them. Did they try to make you happy? Yes, happy. They felt that if they could offer you everything you ever desired, you would be comfortable and satisfied. Disuse causes your armor to soften and fracture. But you saw through it. You identified comfort as another prison. Happiness became another chain when it left their hands. You chose the painful freedom over their comfy jail. As the summit neared its end, they came to a sad revelation. They hadn't been studying you. You'd been studying them. Every test they conducted, every strike they launched, every manipulation they tried. You were gathering information, mapping out their tactics, deciphering their patterns, and remembering their worries. You had turned their spying into an educational experience. We're no longer the scientists. One elder spoke quietly, his elderly voice barely audible. We are the experiment. They have been monitoring us. Them. They understand our vulnerabilities better than we do theirs. The chamber descended into mayhem as this fact spread like a quiet blast throughout their ranks. How long were you aware? How much did you know? How many of their secrets have you deciphered while wearing their victim's mask? Who is the eldest among them? Older than civilizations. Religions that are older than most others have grown slowly. His actions are weighty with the weight of awareness. His next words would reverberate through their hallways indefinitely. The armor serves more than simply a protective purpose. It is for something else. They aren't defending anymore. They are prepared. And with that, the actual emergency became clear. You weren't just surviving their strikes. You were utilizing their assaults to prepare for something much larger. Every blow they delivered became your training. Every wound they inflicted told you about a battle they had never imagined. You were not their victim. You were becoming their substitute. What they had failed to see in all their study, worry, and continuous emergency conferences was that your armor was never intended for protection. It was always designed for something bigger. Every layer of protection was essentially a preparation. Every shield was a blade ready to be drawn. Every piece of armor was a declaration of war against the system that attempted to shatter you. You were not arming yourselves to hide. You were arming yourselves to hunt, not for vengeance. That would be too tiny for humans and too predictable. No, you were about to demolish the whole control infrastructure that had been built over millennia. Your armor did more than simply protect you. On those dark evenings, you concluded that breaking was not an option in order to defend the task you had undertaken. They'd spent years trying to figure out who had armored your soul, but the solution had been there in front of them all along. You did so with each cry that did not shatter you. With each betrayal, you refused to let it define you, instead choosing to become stronger, wiser, and bitter, dangerous rather than damaged. You built it yourself. You created your armor from the exact anguish they attempted to drown you in. And this is the reality that shakes their immortal hearts. Every time they put your armor to the test, it becomes stronger. Each strike adds another layer. Every effort to identify a weakness shows additional strength. They've built something that thrives on conflict, develops on difficulty, and evolves via hardship. In their attempt to kill you, they create their own ending, which you were like skin. The emergency conference concluded with no answers, just warnings that spread like wildfire over their network. Do not interact directly. Do not continue testing the armor. Never, ever attempt to shatter them again. However, it was already too late. The signal has been sent. Others have seen what you become, how you changed what was possible. Across the globe, spirits started to stir in their slumber. People crushed by the same mechanism sensed a change in their chests. The armor no longer belonged to you alone. It had transformed into a blueprint, a living potential, a whisper in the collective psyche. You don't need to break. You may become indestructible instead. And when their monitoring systems lit up with abnormalities, they understood with horror that what they had dreaded most had actually occurred. One armored soul became 10. 10 became 100. 100 became 1,000. Each created their own distinct protection, their own unbreakable defense. They have immunity to the weapons of control. What society dreaded most was no longer a hypothesis. It was causing a widespread awakening of armored spirits that could not be controlled, foreseen, or broken. Panic swept across their ranks like poison. Emergency procedures were initiated. Ancient partnerships reawakened centuries-old resources, which were immediately deployed in a frantic effort to halt what you had begun. But how can you stop an idea that has already taken hold? How can you combat spirits who have learnt to turn suffering into power? How can you break those who have embraced the act of being broken? They are keeping an eye on you even as these words are being delivered. The meeting may have concluded, but the monitoring continues. They keep track of how you respond. They assess your energy signature. They strive to figure out how someone who was once destined for destruction has become such an abnormality. Their encrypted texts are now warning each other. But when they look at you, they see nothing. Not because you are empty, but because you have become too brilliant for their devices to detect or reflect their sight, forcing them to face only their own fears, limits, and impending obsolescence. You've become a walking blind spot in their world, a flaw in their matrix that grows every time someone notices what you've done. Others sense it when they move close to you, not because you summon them, but because armored souls know one another. There is a frequency at which you release a quiet signal indicating that you have survived. And I became something different. Those who create their own armor detect it, react to it, and align with it. You have become a light for the unbreakable, a meeting place for spirits that refuse to be victims anymore. What scares them the most is not your might, but your tranquility. They anticipated rage, retribution, and resentment. Instead, they see you moving with the peaceful certainty of complete safety. You don't flinch because you can't be injured anymore. You do not hurry because you are unstoppable. You stop screaming because you no longer need to be heard. Your armor made you a sovereign, and sovereignty need no validation. Their projection models all show the same unavoidable conclusion: a future in which their strategies fail, where their systems fail, where human spirits grow beyond manipulation. A world in which the armor you created in the darkness is standard equipment for anybody who chooses transformation over victimization. They see it now. An empire created over a millennium, quivering not from riots or revolutions, but from something much quieter and incomparably more powerful: evolution. Their nightmare is a conflict of mind rather than one of swords and flames. A transformation so profound that their whole infrastructure becomes irrelevant. They are plagued by images of the children that are now being born. Children will grow up knowing your tale, observing your example. From their first breath, they realize that armor is feasible. These youngsters will not wait for tragedy to break their defenses. They will develop it ahead of time, knowingly and deliberately. They will be born speaking the language of resilience, understanding that no external force can shatter a soul that refuses to participate in its own demise. They dread the inevitable time when armored souls cease to be anomalies and become the majority, when their archaic control systems clash with millions who simply cannot be managed, when their weapons of fear, shame, and manipulation hit and shatter like glass on diamond. They see a future in which their predator-prey hierarchy crumbles and their predatory behaviors become relics of a worse period. A museum display from a period when mankind has advanced beyond. This is not rebellion. It's the elimination of their way of thinking. Most of all, they fear you because you will not retaliate. Your reluctance to play their game, your disregard for their authority, is more damaging than any act of retaliation. You've advanced so far beyond their paradigm that you're now unintelligible to brains who only comprehend power, compulsion, and control. You are something they have no procedure for, a soul that requires nothing from them, even justice. That is what scares them most. You aren't fighting for their annihilation. You thrive in their irrelevance. And here's the truth. They didn't dare to speak out at the emergency summit. Only the oldest among them understood the truth, which they held as a curse. They've seen this before. Eons ago, in another era, other souls found the same armor. Those spirits did not only defend themselves. They changed the laws of reality itself. They bent the grid, reprogrammed the field, and changed awareness blueprint until the old system crumbled under their own weight. What you've created is not new. It is ancient. They are older than the rest of civilization, older than their control systems, older than the walls. They build around human potential. It is the primordial human design, the architecture of the spirit. Before the tampering started, restrictions were imposed, and spirits were taught to shatter rather than bend. You haven't created anything. You have recalled something. You have an access code that was intended to be erased, activated systems that were meant to be inactive. They know what will happen next because history is round. Souls like yours do not exist at random. They come at regular intervals, like cosmic alarm clocks, rousing mankind from its controlled sleep. And the last time anybody created armor like yours, entire civilizations did not just emerge. They altered suddenly. Empires disappeared. Systems have disintegrated. The collective mind surged ahead in ways that no weapon could contain. They fear because they know it will happen again. Power structures that previously seemed immovable and everlasting. Mountains are silently melting into water, much like salt. Controlling kingdoms, created piece by brick over centuries of dread, are falling through inevitability rather than bloodshed. The impossible has already become unavoidable, and this certainty is what genuinely worried them. Their anxiety is not caused by your distinctiveness. It stems from your universality. You're not alone. Miracle, you are evidence. You represent the first drop of rain before the storm, the first fracture in a dam ready to explode, the vibration that occurs before the earthquake. You are the indication that an era is coming to an end, and something uncontrollable, something they cannot contain, is on the rise. They know they can't stop it since they've tried throughout history and civilization. They've tried. They've hidden the facts, changed the records, muted the voices, and removed the identities. However, every time the cycle repeats, a soul like yours remembers, and their empires crumble, not from outside assaults, but from inside awakenings, deep inside the marrow of their old bones. They understand that the cycle is repeating itself and that their downfall is predetermined. Without speaking, lecturing, or raising a single weapon, you started to communicate lessons as effortlessly as breathing. Your armor has transformed into a living guidebook, a holy text in action, demonstrating what is possible when a soul refuses to accept the programming of permanent injury. The signal does not consist of words. It's the frequency. It vibrates silently. It resonates through presence. It creeps into everyone's consciousness, ready to accept. Even though it is quiet, it is louder than thunder. It states, remember who you are. Trust your suffering as a teacher rather than a tormentor. Allow your scars to create knowledge. Allow your scars to become stars. That radiance transforms every interaction with you into a communication. Everyone who looks in your eyes downloads the code. Some are unaware of it cognitively, but their spirit understands it immediately. Your very existence is reprogramming the collective template of what mankind is capable of becoming. You educate without attempting, lead without speaking, and change without force. You are live evidence that ignoring pain does not make you stronger. It's created by eating something whole and twisting it into strength. True security does not come from walls that keep the world out, but rather from integration, which takes the shadows in and makes them partners. That strength is not numbing. It takes guts to experience all and then choose to climb, develop, and become more, not less. Your own presence has started to revise the old textbook on human resilience, and society can only watch. They witness their victims becoming victorious one by just following the blueprint you've provided. Their well-planned trauma programs are failing because they refuse to break on time. Their division techniques, which were intended to isolate, are becoming bridges of connection. Their isolation cells, which were originally constructed as prisons, are now being converted into metamorphosis pods where souls hatch into their greatest forms. Every weapon they created for control is being reforged as a tool for freedom, and it all started with you and your armor. 3 days after the conference devolved into pandemonium, their most sensitive listening devices recorded something that made even their oldest hearts skip like broken drums. They heard you address the stillness, the universe itself, alone in your chamber, rather than them directly. You weren't whispering into nothing. You were speaking to eternity, and the statements they captured proved the horror they had shared but refused to accept. Your voice was firm and serene, bearing the weight of a reality that existed before their systems. I know you were listening. I've known for years that statement echoed through their archives like fire over parched grass, because they finally realized the true terror. You'd never been their topic. You were constantly alert when they believed they were studying you. You had been examining them while they believed they were measuring you. You were testing the boundaries of their control, and you were no longer simply enduring them. You were exceeding them. Every challenge, assault, every effort to break me. I sensed you were observing. I felt the eyes behind the walls, the data streams flashing with my name, and the quiet scribes transcribing my anguish into reports. But here's something you've never understood. I was never your victim. I was your pupil, and you believed you were dissecting me. I was observing you. Every move you made, every pressure point you squeezed, and every trap you laid became part of my education. I've learned how you function. I discovered what you dread. I learned why your time is up. This is the armor you've grown to dread so much. It is not my alone. It never was. It belongs to anybody who desires it. To everyone who believes that breaking is optional. That agony is not the end, but the beginning. Wounds are not scars. They are blueprints for strength. I'm not exceptional. I am just first. But I'm not last. Not anymore. Could you sense it? All of the spirits are armoring up. All the spirits are refining the blueprint I made by sharpening, strengthening, and developing it. The quiet army. Commanders were not present during birth. Nothing except decision and memory were used to create this. You wanted to know who replied this soul. That was you. Every assault you launched taught me about defense. Every manipulation exposed a fact you wished to conceal. Every betrayal you engineered taught me the real definition of loyalty. You were my inadvertent instructors, and I was your best pupil. But the lesson is finished. School has ended, and the pupil has evolved into something you did not expect. I'm immune to your curriculum, transcendent of your exams as your society's members dispersed from the emergency conference. They implemented their last protocol, which is reserved for existential dangers they cannot contain. It's called the retreat. They are withdrawing their direct effects, agents, and energies from my area totally. Not because they are surrendering, but because they have repeatedly mastered the same pattern. Engaging with me just helps me become stronger. They are betting that without their pressure, my armor would weaken. Without an opponent to protect against, I could soften, forget, and revert to being breakable. This is their final plan. Complete disengagement. They're banking that I need their fight to keep my edge, and that their strikes will justify my armor. However, they have made another calculation error. My armor is not kept together by their hostility. It is self-sustaining, driven by purpose rather than defense. It no longer feeds off their opponents. It feeds into my purpose. I no longer need them to attack since I am not defending. I'm constructing and making. I am educating others just by being at this frequency. Their disappearance isn't bringing me comfort. It is providing me room, space to work, grow, educate, and become something they never imagined. The irony is nearly perfect. They spent so much time attempting to shatter me that they never asked what I would do once I became indestructible. They never intended for a soul that did not need conflict to develop. They never imagined that evolution might occur as effortlessly in peace as in battle. They never imagined someone who might transform their absence into a new sort of presence, another instructor, another instrument for progress. They expected withdrawal would deprive me of fuel, but it has just cleared the battlefield for my next phase without their intervention. The frequency spreads quickly. Without their supervision, the plan spreads. Without their efforts to demolish me, countless others arise. Each one took my signal, and refined it into something much more powerful. They've built the future they dreaded, and now all they can do is watch from a distance as what they sought to repress grows uncontrollable. That's all for today. Dear Father, I pray for the deepening of my faith. Please let me believe you even when there is no tangible proof. Let me believe in your eternal presence, knowing that you will never hurt me. I realize that your intentions for me are ones of success rather than harm, in order to provide me with a bright future. Thank you, kind and everlasting Father, for always hearing my voice. I give this prayer to you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for your love and provisions. I am thankful for your presence in my life and the richness you provide. If this video spoke to you, please subscribe to the channel and share it with others who need to hear this message. Leave a comment below about your trip and how you're getting ready for your own victorious homecoming. If you'd like to contribute to our work, please do so via Buy Me a Coffee. This allows us to consistently improve our content in order to provide you with the best possible experience. The link to Buy Me a Coffee is in the description. No present is too tiny. Whether it's a penny, a prayer, or a share, your generosity spreads God's message and gives people hope. Do not stop here. Watch our next video for amazing insights into the indications that indicate you are the chosen one. We've loved sharing this spiritual journey with you. Thank you for sticking with us until the finish. Keep shining brightly and face your fate with confidence. See you next time. The God Connection sends its blessings to all lovely individuals.